Today, we're excited to have Griffin House on with us. Griffin is an acclaimed singer songwriter who brings a wealth of experience in navigating the music industry, personal challenges, and sobriety, and offers invaluable insights into creativity and recovery. Griffin, it's an honor to talk with you today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So, can you share a little bit about your early music influences and what initially drew you into songwriting?
I started out in sports and as a kid played baseball, golf. I had an offer to play golf at Ohio U, but I was burnt out and I just kind of wanted to do something different. So I ended up going to Miami University where I learned how to play guitar from some guys in an arts dorm that I lived in. A couple of years prior to that, I tried out for some theater in high school and I landed a role playing the bad guy Judd in Oklahoma, and I had to sing for that part, and I'd never sung in my life, so I just sort of figured it out and got a little bit of praise for doing that. So I kind of got hooked into the excitement of performing and being in front of people, and one thing led to another, and I ended up singing for a band in college, and then the band didn't really work out, so I made my own little record and I pressed up CDs and sold them out of my backpack in college in my classes and started playing my own shows. And again, one thing led to another, and I moved to Philadelphia for a production deal that didn't quite work out. But when I finally moved to Nashville after about 6 months out of college and just had some beginner's luck, I was working at a little trinket store downtown selling souvenirs to people at 2 o'clock in the morning and making $6.50 an hour. And I got a call from Island Def Jam Records. The A&R lady there, Diana Fragnito, wanted me to come up and play for the then president Leor Cohen of Island Def Jam. So that was kind of my big break. And after that, I got signed to Network Management and CAA and Network Records, and I put out an album that called Lost and Found that came out in the U.S. and Europe and Canada back when they still had record stores. It was in all those record stores, Best Buy and Barnes and Noble
Yeah,
and
yeah.
all that stuff. So it's kind of exciting because I was kind of a beginner with beginner's luck. I just always loved music and could never imagine that I could do it for a living way back when I was playing golf in high school. But sometimes life takes some crazy turns, and I've been doing it for 25 years now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know that you have your own recovery journey as well. And tell me a little bit about that, how that came to be, and what's your story?
Oh, I was kind of grew up in a family. I had a pretty good childhood. I would say a pretty great childhood. I had good parents, big family. My grandfather on my mom's side was a World War II veteran and fought in the Battle of the Bulge. And he was just a great man that I still think about every day and laugh about and miss him every day. And so there was a sense of family, but there was quite a bit of drinking in the family. I don't know, looking back, if I could say anybody was like really an alcoholic for sure, but it just seemed to always kind of be around. So I think it just normalized the idea of alcohol for me in a big way. It's just sort of like what you did. But for whatever reason, from the beginning, I seemed to have that issue with it. I went to other places with it that other people didn't seem to go. And it maybe wasn't completely obvious right away. I think you see kids in high school getting drunk or getting in trouble or whatever. And I didn't really know if that was normal or if I was different or what. But I guess by the time I was in my mid 20s, I realized that it was causing problems in my life and I needed to do something about it. So I ended up calling the AA hotline when I was probably 23 or 24. And I had no idea what that meant. I ended up at a meeting in Nashville, the Davidson Road Group, and it was me and a bunch of really old people. And I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? What have I got myself into? But I stuck around for about 3 months that time and decided I'd overreacted and went back out on the road, kept playing my music and kept drinking for several years until, this is a big summary of it all. But I got married in 2009, and that was like the first time I think somebody lived with me or was around me long enough to realize that, like, hey, this is kind of a problem. My wife went through a miscarriage. Actually, we were on the road I was opening for the Cranberries. They were doing a North American reunion tour, and she unfortunately went through a miscarriage in Montreal. She was about 2 months pregnant, and that just sort of started the whole ball rolling for, like, we've got to change something. I think through the grieving process of that, she had a lot of grief over that, as did I, and I handled my grief by ramping up my drinking, which didn't help support her. And I think it just created an environment where for the first time, I really had to look at my alcohol use and abuse and do something about it. So that's really when I got into AA. And I just picked up a 2-year chip. June 21st is my sobriety date as of now. It's a summer equinox, so I picked the longest day of the year to get sober again. But even though I know it's not cumulative, I see myself as somebody that's been in recovery for 15 years, which I have. I've gone to you tons of meetings, had lots of sponsors, worked the steps tons of times, and formed really meaningful relationships. So even though I drank again, I think all that time that I spent in AA around Nashville was very, very valuable and kind of set the foundation for me to be able to know what to do when I did drink again. So I count myself lucky for having all that time. And it's always, I guess I've learned kind of the hard way, but also the true way that it truly is one day at a time, and just dealing with just one day, the day that's right here, is kind of how I have to approach it to be successful and not drinking one day at a time, and also learning how to live sober. So I feel like I'm in a good place with that now, and have a good community here in Darien, Connecticut too. So
That's so great to hear. And I'm glad that you're here, and I'm glad that you're in recovery and feeling that. Talk about breakthroughs, right? You're describing so many milestones that you ended up hitting and breakthroughs that you had. Can you tell me what were some of those defining moments, and maybe share with our audience what those moments were, what the narratives were? And I'm sure some of those might have inspired some of your work as well.
I always joke about how I don't really get to write many breakup songs anymore because I've been married for 15 plus years and have 2 kids. So I got all my breakup songs out of the way in my 20s. And now it seems I write mostly about family and probably recovery, just going through life in general, probably partially going through life changes, accepting responsibility, struggling with trying to understand my own psychology. Writing's always been sort of a therapeutic process for me. I think I did that a lot to start with when I didn't know that you could go see a therapist, and I probably couldn't afford one anyway as a starving musician. So I worked out everything with the guitar and pen and paper and singing it for people. That's kind of how I understood what was going on with me, or made sense about what I was going through. But yeah, music's always been there for me to help through all that stuff, even when sobriety's been really confusing, when life's been confusing, when changes are happening. And simultaneously, I wake up now a lot of times and realize that recovery is always there for me. That's been a revelation that I think I've understood in a more meaningful way lately, and has felt really comforting, where I look around and I go, gosh, I could be anywhere in the world really at any time. And if I need help and support, I can come here and be surrounded by people that understand what I'm going through and want to help me succeed in life and sobriety. So that's been a pretty cool feeling lately to have.
Yeah, hey Griffin, Cliff here.
Hey, Cliff.
It's great to be here. There's so many things that resonate as someone in long-term recovery here as well. First of all, congratulations on your recovery. I've learned so much in recovery. One of the sayings I like is, don't count the days, make the days count.
Mm-hmm.
And we do celebrate the number of days we have without a drink. Specifically, that's an AA thing. But I really like people that talk about recovery capital.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of people who are absolutely thriving and flourishing in recovery that have gone back out several times. So I feel like someone like you, as long as you've said, I'm trying this, that
Mm-hmm.
you have a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And we see multiple pathways to recovery. It seems like what works best is the path that works best for you. So
Mm-hmm.
congratulations there. Really excited for you and your 2-year chip. I have a question about being a rock and roll star, creativity, and drug and alcohol usage. So I'm not a rock and roll star. I'm one of those people that was told you're not the creative type, although in recovery, I'm really exploring some creative things, which is fun. So we all see the rock and roll stars. They party, they drink, they smoke weed, they this. Did you rely on alcohol as a performance assistant, or did you think you did? Right? Like getting up on stage is hard. Was it like in the old days, was it I'll have a drink or two and I'll be at ease? So was drinking a part of your career in that you had to change?
It was a part of every night that I went out on stage, but it was pretty clear for me that the nights that were best were when we didn't drink too much. It was very obvious to me looking back that our performances suffered the later the night got and the more alcohol was consumed. And I never had a problem thinking that drugs or alcohol made my writing or my performing better. I knew that it didn't. And so I didn't live under the illusion that like drinking a beer was going to help me write a song. I knew that wasn't the case. I knew that my mind was stronger when it was sober and clear. I think that the difficulty in sobriety has more been for me like, what do you do after those moments are over, or you're in a situation where you're feeling really good and you want to celebrate, or you're feeling really like excited or anxious, and all of a sudden I didn't have the thing to kind of calm my mind down or learn how to relax. I think learning how to relax and just be kind of even keel and enjoy life without it has been the harder thing. But in terms of performing and writing, I know for certain that number one, if you're not drinking or smoking at all, your voice stays in much better shape, and you can write a lot longer during the day focusing on something if you're not just increasing your BAC every 30 minutes, which, I did that before. I would experiment with doing that, but it was always pretty clear that, gosh, I might get a 6-pack of beer and think I'm being really creative or artsy, but by the end of an hour, you're nothing but just drunk and you're not writing better at all. It's like you might have a sweet spot of 10 minutes, but you have all day long if you're sober and all night long if you're sober. So I think that's really obvious to me, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that I know my performances and my writing are better when I'm clean.
I think there still is a myth for a lot of people that these things will help you to be more creative. I think you're one of the lucky ones that realized early. Maybe that's part of the rigorous honesty that you had within you, which we're hearing a lot here today. And I really appreciate that. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. You mentioned something that really resonated with me. I now say with a lot of comfort and confidence that I grew up in an alcoholic culture. And it was a wonderful childhood. I had tremendous family and friends, and we had a lot of great experiences, a lot of laughs, but drinking was so normalized.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather was 82nd Airborne World War II. He had 3 Purple Hearts. You mentioned your grandpa was in the Battle of the Bulge.
Mm-hmm.
I look back at my grandpa's drinking, and I remember a lot of people didn't like when my grandpa drank. And I think, I'm not a clinician, I don't even know if the term existed then, but I think there was some PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how it would be when you look at what they did, right? The battles in Europe and from 1942 to 1945, look at the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan. How could you not drink?
Mm-hmm.
Right, to ease some of that pain and what those people experienced. Griffin, do you think there was an element of that in your family history, that we medicated based on pain and trauma?
I'm sure. I mean, my grandfather was an interesting case because, well, he was World War II veteran, and like your grandfather, he had some medals and stuff, Bronze Stars, and I know that he came back feeling honored by our society, So I think the PTSD thing is a little. I'm sure he had it, but I think it's a lot different thing when you're back and society is praising you for what you're doing, unlike what was kind of happening around Vietnam after our soldiers came back and they didn't get treated so well. And well, he lost his mother when he was 7, so he didn't grow up with a mom. She died of tuberculosis, and I'm sure that he used it to medicate, but my grandfather made it look like he was my hero. Like I just loved him so much, and I wanted to be a lot like him, except for the music part. He never played any music, but I thought, well, I could drink like my grandfather. Like he didn't seem to get in any trouble. He never became really like unlikable. Like I might have seen him drunk a few times, but that was more just like, okay, you're slurring your words, like you need to go to bed. But he wasn't like a jerk ever. And I was. So like I don't know if that was like the other side of the family or whatever, but it was just my grandfather, and admiring him so much has sort of been a mental stumbling block for me for a long time, because I just thought, why can't I just be like him? Why can't I just drink like him? If I need to medicate with some alcohol every night, like, so what? He did, and it was fine, but that just wasn't how it affected me. It affected me differently. It affected my behavior. I have no idea the quantities he actually drank, but I know that the quantities that I was drinking was completely unsustainable and unmanageable. When I drank like I wanted to, it was just way, way too much. And I wanted to be like him for a long time. Finally kind of realized that I'm not him. But yeah, I'm sure that whole generation was riddled with people that needed to come back and drink as a result of the things that they went through overseas.
Yeah, there's the normalization that occurred. And like you said, the fact that he came back and he was able to sustain himself, but also he was praised, just reinforces the behavior, right? So he's feeling the win, but also coping simultaneously.
Yeah.
So for you, you mentioned that you wanted to look like him, you wanted to, be like him. He was doing it, so we could do it. That was the justification. Were there any other reasons that compelled you to utilizing it as a coping mechanism, and how did you come out of that?
I don't know. I do think that my writing and journaling and like self-analysis probably gave me a level of self-awareness that not everybody has, so I'm thankful for that. My wife describes she was home one time when I was out on tour, and she kind of admitted to reading through a bunch of my journals, and she was astonished at how many of my journals were filled up with just like, I'm struggling with alcohol, I'm struggling with alcohol. Like every night or day was just like me trying to figure this out and what I was going to do about it. And I didn't really see it. I wasn't really aware that pattern was just going on for as long as it was. But I think it takes what it takes. I think my wife helped me a lot with that, which at first felt like somebody kind of strong arming you into doing something that you didn't feel like you were ready to do. But then at the same time, I also knew in the back of my mind that I had started to try to look at this myself before I even met her, like years before I met her. So there was a part of me that wanted to tackle it. Alcohol is really simple for me. It's like I like how it feels when I have a beer or two or three. Like that initial feeling of relaxation is so incredibly euphoric for me that I don't think everybody feels like that. And I've never done heroin. I feel like when I drink a beer, I'm shot up with heroin and everything's right in the world and I'm just at peace. And why wouldn't I want to do that? It's like, so I think it took a long time to come to terms with like, yes, you get that feeling and that's really nice, but look where it ends up. And where it ended up eventually every time, even if I seemed like I could control it for a while, was someplace that I didn't want to be and wasn't good for me or anybody else. So I think my daughters helped me. I think my daughters didn't see me drink for the first 6 and 8 years of both of their lives respectively. So, but once I decided to drink again, and then I got to the point where it got kind of bad again, I realized, wow, I don't want my kids' memories of me to be drunk. Like I want to be there for them. I want to be present for them. I want them to have a dad who is not addicted to a substance. And that was highly motivating for me as well, to just kind of get back to where I knew I could be. But it takes a lot of work. I think it's just like we said before, I think showing up to meetings every day is huge for me. Just going and putting your butt in a chair one day at a time. I think that in and of itself is a spiritual practice. It's like, even if I'm not that great at praying, it's like doing the physical action of showing up and being a part of the community and trying to be helpful and trying to do things for the right reason is kind of spiritual in and of itself. I just try to do a lot of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is the prayer. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, Griffin, thanks so much. You're sharing a lot, man. I really appreciate it. And I
Yeah.
connect, and I think alcohol was my drug of choice too. And it was magic.
Yeah.
And I think I'm honest when I say I don't miss it, but just you explaining that brings back the feeling, the relief, right?
Mhm.
Like, oh, I'm good now. And I look back like, I think it made me feel like what I think normal people feel like,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
Maybe it is medication. I bet I would have been ADHD or ADD. It was hard for me to be still and to be present. I liked a lot of physical activity. You talked about AA, and you tested it early, 23, 24 years old. You found your recovery, right? And you've got this program that works for you. I'd love to hear your thought on two things. AA, the early experience, and then your spiritual program. It
Mm.
sounds like you have one. So let's go back to that first time, walking into a meeting when you're a young guy and you're curious, you're
Oh,
contemplative, right? So I would love to hear your thoughts on there. And then today, I can tell you've got a spiritual program. If you're comfortable sharing that, would be great.
Oh, there's so much here. I mean, one is that when I walked into my first AA meeting, none of my friends around me were even thinking about getting sober. And they looked at me like I was an idiot for even considering that I might be an alcoholic. And it was just, they were like, what are you doing? You know? And I didn't know what I was doing. But I remember sitting in a meeting one time. There were a lot of old timers around where I was, a lot of big book thumping, and I was in the South. So there was a particular cultural element of maybe some Bible Belt influence. But I remember coming in there and I was really struggling with the idea of being an alcoholic at 23 years old. And I shared something about like, oh, I was talking to my mom today and she doesn't really think I'm an alcoholic. And I'm just really struggling with whether or not I think that I am. And I'm a new guy, newcomer, 23 years old. And some old timer from the back of the room says to me, like, he crosstalks at me. He goes, I don't want to hear you crying about your mommy. And I was so pissed off at this guy that I wanted to like walk across the room and just slap him. But, he's like, 75, 80 years old. So I just left that day feeling completely humiliated, belittled, not understood. And I didn't stick around much longer after that. When I came back, it was kind of similar in Nashville, but I could feel it evolving. I could feel more and more young people coming in. I could feel things changing. And there was still an element of how it was in the beginning, but a little bit different. And I was making more friends. Then I moved up here and found a whole nother aspect of recovery, which was just tons of young people and tons of people from all walks of life, highly successful professional people also getting sober. And now a bunch of my friends who were looking at me like I was crazy when I was 23, they're calling me and they're getting sober. And we have like this huge thing in common where I can support them and they can support me. And it feels like a lot of things have come full circle. As far as the spiritual thing, it's like a lot of AA is so paradoxical, at least with my story. Like I was explaining earlier, that when I was younger, the whole like feelings aren't facts things. Well, it's like I got into music because I relied on my feelings. Like I didn't think about anything else or question what I was doing. I just followed my instincts 100%, and it seemed to work out okay. So I couldn't figure out for a long time, like, how am I going to operate in the world if I can't completely follow my feelings and my intuition or my heart, because that's how I do things. So that's sort of been a paradox in AA, and to try to find balance with how to live. And the spiritual thing has been that way too, because I think I ran into probably some fundamentalism in college where I thought I kind of had the answer, or a particular belief system that had some kind of monopoly on God with their theology. And so I kind of thought I understood a lot more about God than anyone does. And so I think as I've moved forward in AA, my concept of a higher power has just become being more comfortable with accepting that there's a lot of mystery there and I don't know, and maybe no one knows, but for some reason having some kind of conscious contact with a higher power and faith seems to really help alcoholics and probably everybody in general. So I try to just remain very open-minded, and when I'm conscious enough or smart enough to reach out to that higher power for help, I ask for help and things seem to go better. And so I just try to keep that really simple, keep it really mysterious, try not to figure it out too much, but just, be willing to believe, be willing to have wonder and faith and embrace the mystery.
I love it. And I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Mala after this, but just one comment there, because our paths are very similar. I had a real good life and a blessed life with a lot of achievements and accomplishments. And I thought it was all me. And then things got really dark and really bad really quickly. And I was really sick. And someone I really respect who uses AA, kind of a hardcore AA person, said, have you ever thought that maybe God was with you
Mm-hmm.
for a long time and all of those things weren't really you,
Mm-hmm.
but you had help
Mm-hmm.
from a strong partner that you didn't even acknowledge, and
Mm-hmm.
then you kept using to the point where things changed, your brain changed, and you made different decisions because your brain changed because of your addiction, or translation, you got away from God.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got hit your bottom and you started this program of recovery. Now you're reconnecting with this higher power that you didn't even see or experience before. Now you get to have a relationship with that higher power that was always there.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. But it almost made me feel bad. Like, man, how could I not give credit for this beautiful life
Mm-hmm.
to some force that was always there? And it made me feel really selfish, which was something that my parents did a really good job of saying, like, don't be selfish, right? Be helpful and be about others and be selfless. So it's weird. I almost felt like I betrayed this awesome friend
Mm-hmm.
that was with me. And then I got to rebuild that relationship and acknowledge how much that friend had helped me. And this person said, Cliff, that's spirituality.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that worked for me. And you kind of just described that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Because your instincts now, I bet, are pretty good again. You might not be trusting them as much.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe that's your heart. You had to like realign with your heart, and the disease took it away.
Yeah, it's interesting how it all works. I didn't know how to understand, and still don't, this idea of like God's will. And there were times when, that Benjamin Franklin quote of like, beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy. And I was like, yeah, that, like, that, I agree with that. It felt like, well, why would God make me this way if he didn't want me to be this way? And I guess you finally wake up where it's like, that John Barleycorn is the great, how do they put it? The great influencer, the best lesson that we need sometimes to get beat down. But finally, when I woke up and realized, okay, like, I don't think waking up every morning with a hangover after drinking 12 IPAs at night is what God really intends for my life. So I'm getting off the rails somehow here. And I don't know what God's will is, but it sure seems like it's a lot more of waking up clear-headed and not having regrets about the night before. And it's hard sometimes, but sometimes when it's hard, it can somehow, that seems like more evidence that maybe I'm kind of on the right track rather than, just taking the easy way out, which is, ends up being the hard way.
Yeah. I have a question that's for both of you. Really, you both mentioned how AA has evolved. And I think a lot of people have trepidations walking into that first meeting. First part of the question is, how do you push yourself through it? How do you navigate through? And second question is, how have you seen AA evolve and how has it evolved for you? And this is for both of you.
I suppose I've seen AA be more influenced by, even though when you're in an AA meeting, it's like, this is how we do things. Like, we come to a meeting, we get a sponsor. There's some unwritten rules of like, come to a meeting, work the steps, do these things. But I've seen it be a little more relaxed in terms of leaving room for people to work their own program, whatever that means. It feels more inclusive. It feels more like younger people are coming now. It feels like society in general is waking up to the fact that being extremely addicted to substances is really not all that cool. And anyway, I think there's almost less, it almost feels like society in general is evolving a little bit in terms of more and more. Like, I often even wonder if, like, is recovery kind of trending or something? Because it kind of feels that way. Whereas before, when I came in, it just felt like something that was much more anonymous and much more out of the ordinary. Whereas now it just feels almost completely normalized to be in recovery in a way. I don't know if that's because I've been around longer, or I'm just getting older, but I do think that the world is moving in that way. I like white knuckled it forever because I didn't know. I'm like, I still kind of want to drink. So what other way is there to do it other than like white knuckle and show up one day at a time? And like, as Cliff mentioned before, it's like, I'm a Midwestern person where it's like you're taught a hard work ethic and that things are supposed to be hard. And I just assumed that's the way that it was supposed to be. And even though I was asking for help from both a higher power and other people in the program, it was still really hard. And I think when you're young and you're in a place where like you're not really sure that you love everything about being totally sober forever for the rest of your life, it's like there's good parts of it, but there's also things that are difficult. A lot of it was just like powering through however way I needed to get through until things eased up a little bit. And sometimes I still go through hard days where I just need to do what I need to do to stay sober for this day and then let time pass and things get easier. I think just doing what it takes. And sometimes that means like not drinking no matter what. I mean, it's harder for me when I have really great days. The bad days are kind of like, oh, it's obvious, go to a meeting. But when things are really, really, really good and I don't have my way to celebrate that I know so well, that's when I can get really caught up in my head of like, I'm going to die one day. I should just have a drink. I just have to like talk myself down off the ledge. But I've learned to do that by going to being around recovery for so long. That's where I've learned all that stuff. And it gets easier, I think.
Yeah, I love this. And Dr. Mala, thanks for soliciting my input too. Before I say anything here, I want to say that I truly think that AA helped to save my life. And what they did is absolutely amazing. I think it's divine intervention. If you look at what they did in the mid to late 1930s, post-prohibition, World War I, depression, people were dying like crazy from alcoholism, and they built this program. It's absolutely fascinating. I love to study it and look at it, but there's so many paradoxes within it too. And in the rooms you hear, like, number one, no one gets here on a winning streak. So you don't enter those rooms like life is great. And they say that the untreated alcoholism, the symptoms are you're restless, irritable, and discontent. So these are people who are maladjusted to the world. So when you get in there and you walk into that first meeting and you're not in a good place, it is not comfortable. And the ego deflation hasn't happened yet. And I remember judging all these people. Like, I am a very sick person and my life was a disaster and completely unmanageable. And here I am. I'm so sick that I'm in this meeting judging all these people.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is like that you're forced to say, my name's Cliff, I'm an alcoholic. And we've been taught that an alcoholic is not something you want to be. Right. So with that, I think especially people that grew up like Catholic, right? Shame, guilt. I'm an alcoholic. Come on, I'm an Ivy Leaguer, right? I worked on Wall Street, right? Like, I have a master's degree. I'm an alcoholic. Come on. So that's really so confusing, any and all of that. But then what we learned, Bill Wilson says that we have to be, what you need for this to work is you have to be open-minded, willing, and honest. So open-minded means we should look at how this thing should change over time. And then if you work the program, you will live the promises and you will be happy, joyous, and free. And so all of that together, it's so confusing and complicated and filled with all these paradoxes. And there is no one way. And I think a lot of the old timers, there was a way, one way. Like Trey Laird, a great mutual friend of ours who's on our advisory board here, his organization does such an awesome job of supporting multiple pathways to recovery. Ray says we have to figure out what's right for Griffin, what is right for Cliff, and what's going to work to make your life as productive and wonderful as it can be, being really open-minded. But a foundational principle for Trey and most of the folks in his program is AA. So the one thing that with a voice that really doesn't matter, but if it did, I think the second A in AA does more harm than good. Why? In 1939, what they said was, we don't have enough people to help all the people that might raise their hand and say, I'm an alcoholic. So we have to be quiet and not share publicly that they're alcoholics. I think, though, that part of it, too, was if you tell the world that you're an alcoholic in 1939, you might not get a job, might not be trusted, etc. So I love seeing people who are out and who are proud and saying, I'm in long-term recovery. And it's happening pretty quickly. I feel like, Griffin, I don't know if you feel like that's going quickly, but I think the more people, and people that are flourishing and thriving and doing great work saying, yep, I'm in long-term recovery, addiction kicked my ass. I think the more people we have who do that, the better.
Yeah, I think so too. I've always tried to get around it by, if I was going to mention my recovery or what I was doing with sobriety and it at the level of press, radio, and film, I just wouldn't say Alcoholics Anonymous. I would just say, hey, I'm sober. And like, I wouldn't really say how, but I might even mention meetings, but I just try to toe that line. And like you said, I think it was created for different reasons back then, in terms of they didn't know how many people were going to fail. And if people were falling off the wagon all the time, people would be skeptical of the organization and think, oh, this AA thing doesn't work. So I just try to solve it by being respectful of other people's anonymity, but also being as open as I can with my own recovery to try to help as many people as possible, you know. And I see a lot of other examples of people being very open about theirs, and I'm always appreciative of them doing that. It's encouraging for me when I have other people to look up to that I respect that are also getting sober. It's encouraging for me, so I try to do the same.
Dr. Mala, Griffin was actually in Madison touring a couple months ago, and I learned late and we didn't get to connect. I can't wait to see him live. But Griffin, do you share that you're in recovery when you're on stage?
Yeah, and again, I don't say AA, but yeah, I'll tell people I don't drink, or I'll say I'm in recovery. I remember one night, I guess a couple of years ago, I was on stage in Milwaukee and I was feeling a little weird, and I just decided, you know, I'm just going to befriend the audience this day and like kind of let them support me. And I told them, I was like, man, I'm feeling kind of weird. I stopped drinking a long time ago, and then I picked back up again. And now I'm standing on stage in Milwaukee with 30 days. They just applauded and loved it. They supported me like any other friend would, you know. That was sort of a nice moment where I remember taking a risk at being open and vulnerable about it, and it being good.
Yeah.
Love it, man. That's awesome. Love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great segue into exploring how your recovery journey has influenced your songwriting and performances.
I think family and recovery in general has made my life a lot busier. So in some ways, I don't have as much time to sit around and write songs, which is okay because life's gotten busy. And thank goodness I wrote a ton when I was younger. But I definitely think that I can look back and tell you right off the top of my head songs that were written just based off themes that I was thinking about or contemplating in rooms. You know, I have a song called Go Through It that was written, I think the chorus is you can never get around what you've got to go through. And that was, I had heard that sentiment in meetings before of like, oh, if you find yourself in hell, just keep going. And that's one of my favorite songs that I have. I play it at almost every show. And I have another song called Yesterday Lies that is sort of about wondering if you're remembering the past a little bit differently than it actually happened, which is sort of deals with the euphoric recall that alcoholics can deal with of romanticizing the past. But then maybe as I was getting sober, realizing like, maybe it wasn't quite as good as I remembered it, you know?
Yeah.
But it's nice to be able to put those ideas into artistic form. And I think surely hanging around rooms in recovery has changed my mind in to a degree where I can explore different subject matters. And I think that feels valuable. I wrote a song recently, actually. I don't write a ton anymore with the same, not quite as prolific as I was, but I wrote one called Surrender to Win the other day, which is pretty much,
Wow.
you know, a little on the nose. I like the song. So it's nice to be able to write to those subjects.
That's amazing. That sounds exciting and wonderful. You haven't released it yet, have you?
No, I haven't put it out yet.
Yeah.
But I
Okay.
played it the other night, and my daughter said it was her favorite song that I played all night. So that was kind of encouraging.
Maybe, Dr. Mala, that can be the new intro to the Recovery.com podcast.
100%. Yeah. I'm
yeah.
excited. Yeah, that's really, really
Can
cool.
we get, is that accessible for people like us, that new song?
I have to kind of record it properly.
Okay.
I could send you a demo of it so you can hear it, but I've yet to actually get a finished version of it. But it's all written and ready to go.
Yeah,
I just have to
and whenever you have it ready, please let us know. I'm excited, and I'm gonna listen to Go Through It as well. Griffin, I haven't listened to your stuff, but I'm absolutely going to.
Nice.
And I bet a lot of your content will resonate, whether it's consciously or subconsciously what you're writing. Your wife looked at your writing and she noticed that you were aware of this thing, maybe more than you were aware, right? And I bet that's reflected in your content, maybe even more than you know, right?
For sure.
So another alcoholic listening to that might reveal some things too, which will be super fun.
I mean, there was a documentary, right? Rising Star, and that explored kind of some of the ups and downs that you've experienced as well. Was that your first go at kind of sharing that publicly, or when did you start to feel comfortable in this industry with being able to say, you know, here I am, I'm in recovery?
Yeah, that was certainly a huge step. I mean, I'd probably mentioned it in an interview prior to that movie, but the guy who helped produce, he was actually the videographer and producer of that film was also in recovery, and so he wanted to ask those questions. And of course, answering them on film for a whole movie is a whole different, well, a whole other ball of wax, when you're being pressed on those questions. So, but I kind of knew that I was going to be exposing all parts of my life in a way that required me to be pretty open and honest. So I was kind of prepared for that. But yeah, I think I mentioned it before, but that was certainly the time when I felt like my whole soul was kind of being exposed to the camera. Just could be a little bit daunting, but I signed up for it. So
For sure. Do you feel like the music industry, that, the life, the entire genre and like field encourages that type of expression? Have you been met with challenges?
yeah, I think my friends and I joke about it all the time, and like I don't really mean it in a flippant way, but like my friend will call and be like, "Oh yeah, getting sober is like the new cool thing to do," because it seems like every press release is like, "Well, last year I got sober and then I made this record." And it's like so many people are telling that story. I guess that's probably why I tend to think that I would say like it seems to be trending. But I
Yeah.
mean, to the point of what we talked about before, like when I was going at it for the first time, it wasn't cool yet, and nobody seemed like they were doing it, and I felt very alone. And then somehow how it's changed is that you look around now and it seems like so many musicians are waking up to the fact that like, hey, maybe this isn't helping me, maybe I should try life without alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Well, especially in entertainment.
Yeah.
I think the recovery capital of the Western world is Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
And how many, actors, musicians, right, like and I think my thought and my hope is that you have this revelation that like we've been sold that these performance enhancers are not. And we don't regret the past, but I kind of look back, and I was a competitive athlete and my academic performance suffered because of and like who sold me on that?
Mm-hmm.
Now, but they weren't saying, Cliff, you should drink a 12 pack. Normal people have one or two. And
Yeah.
but I think they're starting to look even with science that especially alcohol, even in small quantities, like it really is not good for your sleep, for all these things. Like, and I think they're starting to see like this is poison. And the reaction for most people, like if you give vodka to a 6-year-old or bourbon, it's horrible. The
Right.
reaction, human reaction to it is like, but we're like, it's the effect,
Mm-hmm.
right? Men and women drink because they like the effect,
Mm-hmm.
right? Produced by alcohol. So I don't know, man. It's cunning, baffling, and powerful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're so right, Cliff. Like there's this thought process where like, oh, if I have a drink, it'll help me sleep, when in fact it's actually disturbing the entire sleep cycle and gonna lower your sleep quality. So it backfires on you. It doesn't work. But that initial feeling, the euphoria that you mentioned, Griffin, that's what pulls you back in. And it's a vice, turns into that vice. But what advice would you give to your peers, to fellow musicians, to anyone who might be facing some of those similar challenges?
Oh gosh. My friend that I was talking with, it's pretty newly sober the other day. I try to just let him know that I'm there for him no matter what. And I kind of said, when I listened to what he was going through after, which before giving any advice, I would say, listen as much as you possibly can and speak as little as you as you have to. But at the end, I kind of just said, in my experience, this felt like maybe the hardest thing I ever had to do, but also the most worth it. I know a lot of people too that go through the process thinking it's going to be a lot harder than it is, and they're like, hey, why didn't I do this sooner? Like everything's so much better. So there can be that aspect to it too, where people come in and they start figuring out what it's like to actually live without alcohol and how much better it is. And after getting over that initial little hump, it's usually pretty obvious that things are a lot more positive.
It's very clear. Music, family, these are anchoring elements in your life. And I'm sure that's what you've used to help with influencing others. Is there anything else that you do to kind of like share that, spread that wealth? Because you have so much and I'm hearing it, we're feeling it. How can people reach out to you, or how do you, engage in the community?
I just try to make a lot of friends. I try to talk to people more, get to meetings a little early, stay at meetings a little later, go to do activities that other people. I like hanging out with sober people. I like playing golf with sober people, doing music with sober people. We just got back from a vacation at my wife's aunt's house in Cape Cod, and there was no drinking the entire time. And it's just like, it's so much easier and more enjoyable for me to be around that. So I choose usually to be around those types of environments where the fun doesn't have to be centered around alcohol. And when I ask myself the honest question of like, would I have enjoyed this more if I was drinking? The answer is honestly always no. I had a great time being there the way that it was. And I had one moment last month where I was in Ireland and I was playing some music in a pub and they were having this joyous celebration and the Guinness was going all around. And I was like, man, I'm overseas. I got to get the hell out of here before I lose my mind, So there are moments like those as well that can still be challenging from
Mhm.
time to time. But, in general, it's just pretty obvious that life is a lot better
Yeah.
without it. And I try to let people know that that's my experience.
Yeah. What would you tell your younger self? What advice would you give yourself?
Probably just don't be afraid to live your life sober because you're not missing out on anything. I think sometimes my mind can play tricks on me that makes it feel like even when I was explaining when I was in Ireland of like this kind of feeling of, oh, I'm not fully engaging in this experience if I'm not like drinking a Guinness in Ireland. I'm missing out on something. And it's like, that's just not true. Yeah, I would tell myself that I'm on the right track and to just keep going and enjoy it.
Yeah, I love it. That's so great. I think one other question that I have, some of those elements that help pull you through, especially the one that you've come back to where you're like, oh, is it going to be better if I did use, would it be better? There's like that allure. How do you pull yourself through that? What would you share as tools and techniques to other people who might be facing the same challenge?
One trick that I use that I think is the trick that works the best for me is that I remember that, and I always tell myself this, I've never woken up one morning and thought, man, I wish I really drank last night, And that's the big thing is that I know the morning's coming. I know that when I open my eyes in the morning, I'm going to be really, really happy with myself that I didn't choose to give into it. So no matter how good it looks in the moment, that time will pass and I'll have to pay the piper. So that perspective helps me a lot. I think we get the strength to be able to do hard things or be in certain situations and make it through by the amount of work that we put in on the front end. So, my wife was saying like, well, how did you get through that moment? And I was like, I got through it by going to hundreds of meetings before I went. I got through it by like all of sort of the sober currency that I put in the spiritual savings account before I went over there. So I had all that to draw from when I was in a hard position. I remembered who I was and who my friends were, and that I wanted to pick up my 2-year coin when I got back.
I love that, man. That's the recovery capital, brother. And my sponsor said like every day, every challenge, every whatever is another brick in the foundation.
Yeah.
That was beautiful, man. So
Yeah.
and that's why the time matters, right? Like you said, it's 2 years since alcohol has been in your system, but you've been working on this thing for what, 15, 18 years, really, right? I mean, that's a long time, man. So
yeah.
And someone said to me early in the rooms when I still was struggling, said, listen, kid, you don't know this yet, but you got drafted by the championship team. You did. And someday you'll realize that. And they don't know it. I don't know if they'll have the opportunity to join this team. And I didn't believe that at the time. I believe it now.
Yeah.
I really do. Like, you're performing at a level probably greater than you've ever performed before, right? And it's weird. I remember in the beginning, it was like I felt like, this sounds horrible, but it was like boring, kind of. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't have this anymore.
Right.
But I think your steady state is up here, right?
Yeah, true.
Yeah. All right. Well, we ask one last question of all of our guests. But before I do, Cliff, was there anything else that you wanted to ask?
No, thank you so much, Dr. Mala, for letting me be a part of this. And thank you, Griffin, for joining us. This helped my recovery today, man, spending time with you. And I'm so excited to get the chance to spend more time with you. I'm going to start listening to your music. And I might get to see you in person in a couple weeks, man. That would be great.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Griffin, whenever you get back here too, like, you know, let us know in advance. We got a big growing team here at Recovery.com, and we could probably explore some cool stuff to do together too. So
that'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah. So our last question is, what does recovery mean to you?
I think it means just being able to have a chance and be given the gift to show up one day at a time for the people that I love, and get to show up for myself and make the most of each day, you know. And if I'm sober and clear, then I'm not going to miss anything. And if I'm the other way, I'm going to miss it, which is sort of the it's good for me to say that out loud, because my brain can try to kind of twist that one sometimes.
Sure. That's so great. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks, Dr. Mallon. Thanks, Cliff, a lot.
thanks, Griffin. Thanks, Dr. Mallon. See you guys soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye.